So one day I went back to Walmart to retry my failed cardboard boat. I got Gorilla Tape, some duct tape, some cardboard, and bubble wrap. And then I headed home. I also ended up getting this cart because it was fun. I got home and started building my new design. It was going to be a lot more boxy this time, and my plan was to put 2 boxes together. I used Gorilla Tape to tape the seams of the boxes, and then I put them together. And then I flipped it over to tape the bottom. And after that, I cut out the middle piece that was inside the box. And then I covered the whole bottom of the boat in duct tape, and ended up using the whole roll. And then I covered it in bubble wrap so it would float, I guess. And it was done. I'm running out of time, so part 2 tomorrow. So one day, my brother and I decided to go dumpster diving at a phone store. I looked in the dumpster and it was kind of gross. So my brother got in and looked around while I waited outside of the dumpster. After looking for a little bit, he found a screen protector and he kept looking and eventually gave up. So I decided to get in and give it my shot. And I bent down to look inside a box, and inside was this.
What? No way.
I looked at it and then I got out and began to open it.
Alright, let's open it up.
Like for part 2. So one day I decided to go magnet fishing. I got the magnet and then I headed down to the creek. I tossed the magnet in and got nothing. And then got some more nothing. Yeah, and then I got some more nothing. So then I went on over to a different spot and saw what looked like a phone. I threw the magnet in but missed, and then I couldn't get it, and all I kept doing was stirring up the dirt. The dirt eventually cleared and I could see it again. So I threw it in and eventually I hooked it. And I pulled it up.
Yeah, this thing's definitely ruined.
The magnet wouldn't come off and it was definitely broke. Then I got the magnet stuck on a pole.
I see something right there.
I saw something in the water, then threw the magnet in, and on the second try, I hooked it. Like for part 2. So one day I ordered a human-sized hamster ball to run in the creek with. I took it outside, unboxed it, and unfolded it. I then plugged the air pump in and turned it on. And while it was filling up, I pulled all the folds out to make sure it filled up all the way. It was done, and I rolled it out to the grass and unzipped it, and all the air came out.
Air pump.
Yeah, I felt pretty dumb, but then I took it to my brother's truck to take to the creek. We got there, and I drank the Bang to have energy like a hamster. I got in the ball, and my brother started filling it up. It was pretty neat from the inside, and I liked the air. And then it was done, and I ran towards the creek.
Follow you.
I got in the water.
Whoa!
Like for part 2. Part 2 of putting a hamster ball in the creek. Don't try this at home or anywhere. So I walked in and it was pretty strong and started to carry me away. It was pretty neat in there, but when I tried to stand up and run, I just fell. So I laid down and then I got back up and tried again. But yeah, it never worked. So I just chilled and let the current take me, and then we came to this bridge thing and my brother and my dad stopped me. But I couldn't quite run up to land, and it was kind of a problem. And then some other people helped push, and I made it up and ran off. And then my brother unzipped me.
Good job, Jack. Whoa, my ears popped.
So one day I ran outside and saw a watermelon, so I ran to it. I picked it up and then ran it back to my house to open it up the only way I knew how, with rubber bands. I put some rubber bands on it, and then I got a sheet for when it breaks. And then I continued placing rubber bands on it with the help of my brother, and it was starting to actually work. I kept doing it, and then my brother drew a face on it.
Henry!
And then we just kept going until eventually we ran out of good rubber bands. So I was left with no choice but to run out in the rain, get in my car, and drive to Walmart. I got there, got my rubber bands, and then headed back home to get back to placing them. And eventually I could even see the indentation in the watermelon. And then I actually predicted it.
It's gonna bust.
When?
Any second.
Oh, God.
I just know it.
Instant replay. And it left this water rubber bands, like for me to turn it into a rubber band ball, part 2. Part 2, putting rubber bands on a watermelon. So it exploded and left us with this wad of rubber bands. So I decided to turn it into a rubber band ball with all the leftover rubber bands. I began by making the wad a lot neater, and I discovered this.
There's watermelon inside this.
So I did my best to get it out and then kept making it neater, and then eventually started placing actual rubber bands on it. And after a while, I took a break to go shoot some hoops with it. And let's just say it's not a basketball, and I ended up breaking my backboard more than it was already. And then I waited till the next day at like 2 in the morning to start trying to place more rubber bands on it. I finished my pile and started placing another bag, and eventually I was down to the last one. And to be honest, it was a lot of time for very little difference, but I got another bag anyway and started placing them. I finished it up and I had a ball, I guess. Let me know if I should even keep doing this. Part 3 of making a rubber band ball. So this watermelon exploded and left us with this wad of rubber bands. So I turned it into this actual rubber band ball, and now we're here and I'm out of rubber bands, so I went to Walmart. I got some rubber bands and then went home and emptied them out and opened up a bag. And got busy. But after a little bit I left and then came back the next day. And finished off the pile. And then I dumped out 2 more bags and started placing them. But I got bored and ended up leaving and coming back again the next day to finish it all off. I placed rubber bands forever, and then I went outside to test it out on my broken hoop. Yeah, it was hard to play with, but it bounced really high. Here's it next to a basketball. Yeah. After that, I went back inside to finish off the pile, and then I dumped out another 2 bags and started placing rubber bands for what felt like an eternity. And I was finally down to the last bag. I put them all on, and I was done. And it's pretty big, but it's going to take like 1,000,000 likes for me to keep going. So one day I filled a giant hamster ball up with water and busted the zipper and all the water came out. Full vid is on my YouTube, but anyway, now I want to see if my hamster ball still works so I can put a hoverboard in and ride in it. So I fixed the zipper and then aired it up. I wanted to see if it would still hold its shape after having all that water in it. And after it was all aired up, it still did. So I pushed it over a bush and out to the yard to mess with it. I kicked it, and then I pushed it, and then I jumped on it, and then I jumped on it again. And after that, I deflated it and then got in it with my hoverboard to air up. And after a little bit, it was done filling up. So I picked up my hoverboard, walked out to the street, sat it down, and got on. And it worked. I spun around, and I also drove to the hill part to go down it. And I fell. But I kept going. And then I turned around and went back up and fell again multiple times. And then I headed home and really fell. So I got out.
That was cool.
And drove off. So one day I decided to see how much a pawn shop would give me for my rubber band ball. So I got in my car and drove out to one, but it was closed for another 30 minutes. So I waited, ate a burrito, and then went back in and said,
I got this rubber band ball.
Okay.
I want to sell for $200.
Why do you think it's worth $200?
I put a lot of time into it. It's a lot of rubber bands,
How many rubber bands are in there?
like 14 bags.
How many is in a bag?
I have no idea. But it weighs 6.5 pounds.
Wow, does it bounce? Wow, bounces pretty good. Well, how old are you?
16.
You gotta be 18 before you can do anything with it.
and then he said he'd give me $100 for it if I counted all the rubber bands and had someone 18 sell it for me. So I thought about it and said,
200.
No, I can't go 200 on it, but that'd be worth just watching you count that many rubber bands for $100.
500.
I couldn't get $500 out of a rubber ball.
How much do you think you could sell this for?
$50.
I'm gonna have to walk.
All right, appreciate you coming in.
So then I walked out with my rubber band ball, and I guess I'm just going to have to keep adding bands. So one day I wanted to put chalk dash lines all around my neighborhood like I saw this girl on TikTok do. So I went to Walmart and got some spray chalk and some regular chalk. Then went home and tried to make a stencil out of cardboard but failed. Then I tested out some spray chalk, and after that I measured the middle of the road and marked it. Then I tied some rope to a hoverboard to try to pull me, but it failed. Then I made it longer, and it still failed. So I tried walking, but that sucked, and I thought it'd be easier with some normal chalk, but it still failed. So I got out a hoverboard I thought was broken, and it worked perfectly. And when I ran out of one piece, I got a new one, and kept going all the way until the end of one side of my neighborhood. I ran out again, but kept going, and then was done. And then I went back home, got some more chalk, and went out to the other side of my neighborhood to get started. And I finished off the neighborhood and ran out of chalk. And then on the way home, my hoverboard died, so I had to carry it all the way home. And now here's driving before the lines, and here's driving after. So one day I wanted to put a bunch of ball pit balls in my giant hamster ball. So I went to Walmart and got 700 balls, took them to my car, loaded them all up, and went home. And put them all in my hamster ball with the help of my brother. Then I got in and let it air up. Psh, until it was done. I splashed all the balls around, and then I headed off the stairs, into the driveway, and on out into the street, where I slipped and fell. I then jumped up into the balls, and then I wanted to hit this ramp, and I just ran over it. Then I went back onto the road, ran for a bit, then fell again, and made a snow angel, and threw some balls. I got back up and walked off. Then I shook the entire thing, and then went back on home, got out, got back in, then got out, fell on it, and used it as a beanbag. Like if I should do it again with more balls. So one day I decided to go to Walmart and get a can of Flex Seal and a few sheets of cardboard, and then I headed home to build a cardboard boat. I had the stuff and I was ready to build. I cut the sheets so I could form them into a boat. I then took my duct tape and I duct taped all around it. I then flipped it over and duct taped that side. I got the base for the boat and positioned it in. I put some duct tape on it, flipped it over again, and put another piece of cardboard on it for support. Now it was ready for the Flex Seal, so I took it to my backyard to be sprayed. I sprayed all around the seams and in every corner until I was done and ready to test it in the creek. Like for part 2. Part 2 of magnet fishing. So I pulled in the thing.
Dude, no way. It's a skateboard. How the heck did this get in there?
Then I went over to fish some more, and I saw this coin in the water and tried to get it.
Money ain't magnetic.
But my brother
Wait,
said,
what?
Money's not magnetic.
I felt pretty dumb, and then I splashed the water with the magnet, and then I went up with my skateboard. I tried to skate beside the side of the road, but I sucked because I've never really skated before.
They call me Tony Hawk. Ain't much to it, but to do it.
Then I took the board home and messed around with it. I tried to do lots of cool tricks. I kicked it, then I jumped on it, then I fell off, and then I threw it. So one day I went to Walmart and got a bunch of poster board and a roll of Gorilla Tape. And then I headed home to build a giant paper airplane. I started out by making a smaller version to test the material out, and it flew pretty well. Then I got out 4 sheets of poster board and taped them all together with the Gorilla Tape. And it was already turning out better than I thought it would. I then flipped it back over and folded the plane in half. After that, I started making all the folds necessary to make a paper airplane. And it was kind of hard to work with a material like this, but by taping it all, I kind of managed. I folded it in half, and then I made the wings. And after that, I taped up all the seams and the bottom of the plane for extra support. And it was done and ready to be thrown off a bridge, like for part 2. So one day I got an air mattress, some cardboard, some tape, and I started making a cardboard boat. I started by taping 1 sheet of cardboard on the edge, and then I added another sheet on the end and taped it down. After that, I added 1 last edge piece and taped it down all around. Then it was done, and I picked it up and put it in my brother's truck, and we headed down to the creek and carried it down to go test it.
Dude, let's just sail off right there.
I put it in the water, and then I got in and started rowing. And I rowed out decently far.
Dylan?
But any further, I was headed for a current, so I made my way back. And then we both got in to sail, like for part 2. So one day I decided to get in my human-sized hamster ball and fill it up with water. I first filled it all the way up with air, and then once that was done, we put the hose in and added water. And we ended up stopping when the hamster ball got too heavy to move. I then rolled off, and it was really heavy and hard to push, so I ended up just sitting down, but then it was cold. I made it all the way out to the street and then jumped in it. And also fell down. I pushed the ball out to the yard and then sat down again because I got tired.
I'm a fishy. Flopfish.
I then got out and then later decided to do it again, but this time with less water so I could move better. And this way was much better. I could run and splash the water around a lot better, but I also fell down. Now on my YouTube, I will be making a video where I fill the entire thing up with water and then get in it like a fish in a fishbowl. So one day I decided to get a snorkel and a towel and head down to the creek to look for treasure underwater. I set my stuff down, put my gear on, and then headed into the water. I looked around and found a rock. I kept looking with no luck, so then I put my phone on this thing to film underwater. And I kept scanning around underwater looking for stuff and eventually found this pair of sunglasses. Then I saw this flip-flop floating, and it was someone who was swimming over there, so I threw it to him. And then I began walking over to a deeper part of the creek to look for stuff. And I ended up taking off my snorkel because it was useless. Then I went back out, and after a while of looking, I found this pipe thingy. And I put it on my head as a necklace. And then I went back out, jumped in, and found this. Like for part 2. So one day I went to Walmart and got tinfoil to make a giant tinfoil ball like the ones I've seen people making on TikTok. I started with a small one and then began wrapping more and more tinfoil around it. and it looked pretty cool, like an asteroid. And I just kept wrapping it, and like a snowball, it just kept getting bigger. I continued to wrap it for quite a while, and it was beginning to look pretty cool. I finished it up, and then I took it outside to play basketball with it on my jankety hoop. And it stuck in the hoop, but I got it out and started playing with it. And not gonna lie, I was doing pretty good with it. I even made this long shot. Then I got it down, and while I was walking back, I shot from behind and made it. Yeah. And then it came down like a giant asteroid. So one day I ordered a go-kart attachment for my hoverboard. I got all the parts out, and then I looked at the instructions and tossed them. And after that, I quickly realized I needed them, and then I started putting everything together. I finished it all up and then strapped it to my hoverboard, and then got on it and drove out the door. I drove to the driveway and then through a puddle, and then down the road and lost control. And then lost control again and hurt myself.
You sound like a whale.
I pulled it out of the ground and the hoverboard wouldn't work anymore. So I tried to fix it by tossing it. And when that failed, I got all sad. But then I had the thought, I'll just go to Walmart and blow all my money on a new one. So I got there, pushed the button, and then took it home. And then I put my go-kart attachment on it to ride it around. I kept riding, and then I also failed on a wheelie. And then I made my way towards a hill to go down it, and ended up losing control again and going into someone's yard and then doing it again. And then the next day, the broken one worked somehow, and I wheelied it and spun on it and finally drifted out. Part 4 of making a rubber band ball. So this watermelon exploded and left us with this wad of rubber bands, and I've been adding a lot of rubber bands to it. And I said it would take 1 million likes for me to keep going, and it got 4 million. So I went to Walmart, got more rubber bands, and then left, went home, set them down, and opened them up. And then the next day, I got on that rubber band grind, placing the entire pile on the ball. And when I was done, I left and came back again later to place another bag on. And once I finished that ball, it was pretty big, like the size of my head. I weighed it, and it weighed 5 pounds. And it also bounced pretty high, and made a decent basketball for my broken hoop. And after that, my brother wanted to play some bands, so I let him. But he gave up, and I ended up having to finish his pile off. And after that, I only had one more big pile left, so I dumped it all out and started placing them. I finished it up and then started on the bag of thicker rubber bands. And now I'm out. This sucked a lot, and since the last post got like 4 million likes, it's going to take like 5 million likes now for me to keep going. So one day I was just scrolling through TikTok and I kept seeing this apple bottle trend. So I drove to Walmart and went to the juice aisle to look for it. But there was none. So I left and went to a nearby Dollar Tree to look. And there was none there either. So I left and went to Target to look. And all they had were these big bottles that didn't crunch like an apple at all. And I bought the bottle I bit because germs. And then left, went home, and then went back to Walmart the next day to look again. And then to a neighborhood market that had them, or so I thought. I took them home, opened one up, and then bit into it. And it wouldn't crunch.
That doesn't sound like an apple.
I had got the glass bottles, but I drank it anyway, and it was pretty good, so I just kept drinking it. So one day I went to Walmart to get the stuff to make my biggest cardboard boat yet. I got a lot of tape and a lot of cardboard, and then I left and went home to start building. I set up one sheet to start, and then I added another. I taped it all together, and then I added a final piece. Taped that piece down, and then I taped all the flaps down. And then after that, I started adding a second story of cardboard on top of this one to make it look more cool, like a ship. I put the final piece on and then taped all around it to seal it together. And I taped all these flaps down as well. And then I got in with another sheet of cardboard to tape down the base. And then I flipped the boat over and started adding as much tape as possible to the bottom to try and waterproof it. And I ran out. Like for part 2 where I put it in the creek, or watch the full video on my YouTube later today. Cardboard boat part 2. So I picked up the boat and put it in the bed of my brother's truck, and then took it down to the creek, got it out, and carried it down. I put it in, the water was already leaking when I tried to get in, so I pushed it over to a ledge and tried to get in from there, but it just sank. And I tried to row in it, but it was just a fail. So then I got out, pulled it to shore, folded it up, and then took it home for repairs. Like if I should try again. Part 5 of making a giant rubber band ball. So I've been making this rubber band ball, and I ran out of rubber bands, so I went to Walmart. Got a bunch more rubber bands, and then I went home, dumped 2 bags out, put some gloves on so I didn't break my skin again, and started placing the bands. And then left and came back the next day to finish off the pile. It looked pretty good so far, and then I forgot to video placing a whole nother bag. But it looks like this, and then I dumped out all the colored rubber bands and started placing them all on the rubber band ball. And I was done, and it was almost the size of my head and weighed 8.2 pounds. And bounced pretty high. And also made a decent basketball, like if you want me to keep going. So one day I ordered a life straw that's supposed to allow you to drink any water. I opened it up, read the package, and then tried to drink with it. And it had the wrong end, but the other end wouldn't fit. So I went and got a container, dumped my drink into it, and then drank out of the wrong end again. And the straw made it taste kind of funny, so I got up and went to test it on hot tub water. And let's just say it still tasted like hot tub water. I spit it out, and then I left and went to the creek to test out the creek water. I put my straw in the water and started drinking it. And
Tastes like water.
I took another drink from the creek, and then I threw the straw around my neck and left. So one day I wanted to make a giant paper airplane because my last one failed, so I went to Walmart, got some tape and some poster board, and then went home to start construction. I started by positioning 4 pieces together, and then I took some tape and taped them all together. Then I flipped it over and taped all the creases on that side. Next, I folded it in half, laid on it, and then unfolded it and folded all the little necessary folds in order to make the plane. I folded one side down, added some tape, and then folded the other side down and added some tape. Then I folded the plane in half and folded down one wing, and then folded down the other one. I added some more tape to it, and I was done. So I put it in my car and drove on out to a bridge to throw it off. It was kind of flooded, but I threw it anyway, and it totally failed. So I went down there, over a puddle, and into the woods to go get it. I got it out of the water, and it was totally destroyed. Like for part 2 for me to make a better one. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and it now weighs 8.2 pounds, but I want it bigger, so I went to Walmart, got a bunch more rubber bands, then went home, dumped them out, put some gloves on, then emptied out 2 bags of colored rubber bands, and got busy placing the entire pile. And after I finished the colored rubber bands, I dumped out 3 bags of normal rubber bands and placed that. I placed a bunch, but then left and came back the next day to place some more. It got tiring, and I placed a lot of rubber bands, so I left, took another break, and came back and started on it again. I was sure to place the whole bag this time, but I got too tired and had to leave and come back again the next day to finish it off. So that's what I did, and I finished it up. And it was done. It weighed 10 pounds, was bigger than my head, and bounced pretty high. Like if you want me to keep going. So one day I wanted to see what all I could crush with rubber bands. So I went to Walmart and got a water gun, rubber bands, some Dr. Pepper, and a jug of water. Then I left and went home. I dumped out 2 bags of rubber bands, shook up the 2-liter, and started placing a lot of rubber bands on it. And then I just decided to go throw it, because I was scared it was going to blow up. So I threw it, and it didn't do anything. So I went and I tried again. And this time, it kind of worked. And it looked like this. And after that, I started on the water jug, alternating with my brother, because it was kind of tiring. And eventually I started messing with the cap and accidentally made it come off. I was shocked. I drank some and then I left and went inside to start on the water gun. I placed a bunch of bands on it and then realized it'd never break and left. Part 2 of making a giant paper airplane. So I made this giant paper airplane and threw it off a bridge, but it failed. So I went home, assessed the damage, and put it in the dumpster. Then I reviewed the footage and knew what I had to do. I went to Walmart, got more poster board, then went home, swept the driveway, and set all my stuff down to begin construction. I again started by placing the 4 sheets together, and this time I used Gorilla Tape and also used a different type of poster board. I folded the plane lots of times and just began making all the necessary, paper airplane folds while adding tape until I was completely done. And it was done and ready to be tested. Like for part 2 or watch the full video on my YouTube at Dylan Ayres later today. Part 2 of filling up a giant hamster ball with ball pit balls. So I had put 700 balls in, but it wasn't enough, so I went to Walmart and got 800 more. I put them all in my trunk and then went home. Set them all down, put them all in my hamster ball, and then got in and let it air up all the way. And when it was finally done, I went off the stairs and almost took out these flowers, but didn't and went on out into the road, where I slipped. And then I buried myself until I was no longer visible. Then I got up, ran for a bit, then I shook the ball around and jumped in it. And got back up and ran over the ramp. After that, I figured out these balls would race around the inside. Then I got up and decided to fall one more time. Then got out and jumped on it. Full vid will be on my YouTube, Dylan Ayres. So one day I wanted to put my giant hamster ball that's filled with ball pit balls in the creek. So I got a pull noodle and some paracord, untangled the paracord, looped it through, and tied it on. And after that I went to the creek to plan it all out. And the only problem was some cows. So I went home anyway, deflated the hamster ball, and put it in my brother's truck. Then I took it down to the creek, got in it, and let it air up. Psh, until it was done. And then I made my way down, over the rocks and on out into the creek, where I walked for a bit and then laid down and drank my water. And eventually my brother let go of the rope and I was off out into the current, alone in my hamster ball. Like for part 2 or watch the full video on my YouTube, Dylan Ayres. So one day I ordered an inflatable couch to float down the creek in. I unwrapped it and then let it air up and got on it. And then folded it into a couch and my dog got on it. Then we took it outside, put it in my brother's truck, and went to the creek. I sat by the highway and then carried it all the way down, over the rocks, and out to the water, and out to the launching point where I pushed off. And it worked really well and was amazing. I continued on, and then decided to lay down and just enjoy the ride. And then I almost ran into a tree. And I kept going out even further and waved goodbye to my brother. And before you know it, I was just gone, out of sight of anything but the GoPro. But eventually I came back and dragged it all the way back to shore, up the rocks, and into the truck, and all the way home. Part 2 of making a painting and selling it on eBay. So I put it on eBay for $500, and then I woke up the next morning and checked my phone. And I saw that it was bidding for over $10,000, so I immediately got up and made another one. This one was bigger and actually looked kind of nice, and I put some effort into it. I took a nice picture of it and put it on eBay with a starting bid of $1,000. And the title, Conflicts of Life, with the description that read, "The lines symbolize the different conflicts of life, while the swirled background shows the spinning pool it's all trapped in." And my dad also made a painting that I named Waves of Life, and I also wrote the description. The colors represent the many waves of life and emotions that we face that are constantly changing. So now I guess we'll see how they bid. So one day I decided to take a metal detector and a shovel and go look for stuff in my yard. I heard my first beep and it was just a BB, so I kept going. And I heard another beep, so I got my shovel and started digging. And it was a Hot Wheel.
A car.
So I put it in my pocket and kept looking. And then I heard another beep, so I ran and got my shovel and started digging. And there was nothing there.
Fire!
So I kept on going until I heard another beep. And then I dug it up. And it was an old toy.
How did this get in the ground?
And then I walked around my yard some more with no luck.
Yeah, I'm leaving.
So then I left and went to an abandoned race car track. And I found a battery. And then I just kept looking around, roaming. And I heard another beep. And the full video will be on my YouTube at Dylan Ayres. So one day I could feel in the air that a storm was coming. And I was right. There was a tornado warning, so I waited for it while I ate some beans, and then it rolled in, while my dad just sat in a chair watching it. It started to pick up and blow even harder, and it was pretty neato looking. And when I thought it was getting bad, I ran inside, grabbed my beans, then I ran out the door and headed for the storm shelter. It was pouring down rain, and I didn't know if my beans would make it, but we got there, I put it in, and then I ate them. And then I saw a spider. And that's my dog. And then we got out because we were probably overreacting and I ate all my beans. So, yeah. So one day I decided to go for a run. So I got up out of my chair and took off in my kangaroo shoes. I didn't know where, why, or how far I was going, but I just kept running. I ran all the way to the street, and when I got there, I just kept going. I just continued on running through my neighborhood, one foot after the other. And before long, I had ran all the way out to the countryside. And I just still kept running. And I just ran until I went into a ditch, you know? So one day I wanted to make a cardboard saw like the paper saw I made. So I traced out a blade, cut it out, and then screwed it onto the angle grinder. And then I was ready to cut some fruit. I turned on my saw and started in on the apple. And it was working pretty well, so I kept going. And eventually I started in on the grapefruit, which ended up ruining my blade. So I took it off and made a new one from a cereal box. And then I screwed it onto the grinder and started trying to cut the cereal box in half. And it did pretty well and almost cut it entirely in half. And after that I started back in on the grapefruit, which ended up ruining this blade too. So I ripped the grapefruit in half and then threw it in the woods. and also threw the rotten apple in the woods. So one day I went to Walmart to get the stuff to retry my failed cardboard boat attempt. I got a bunch of tape and a pretty good amount of cardboard. And then I left, went home, and started building. I first began by setting up one sheet and taping it down. And then I added a second sheet and used a lot of tape to tape it to the first one. After that, I connected the two with a final sheet of cardboard and used a lot of tape to secure it. Next, I folded down all the flaps with a bunch of tape to make it thicker and float better. Then I flipped it over to tape the bottom, and I also added the base sheet and taped that down too. I finished taping that and then flipped it back over to tape the bottom up, and also added another sheet of cardboard for more support. Then finished off the boat by taping up the entire bottom to waterproof it. And it was done and ready to be tested in the creek. Like for part 2, or just watch the full video on my YouTube at Dylan Ayres. Cardboard boat part 2. So I picked up the boat and put it in my brother's truck along with an oar. Then we went down to the creek and I carried it down. Then I walked out to my launching point, got in, and pushed off.
Good job, boy.
It was working.
I'm doing it. I always knew I could.
I kept on rowing and it eventually started to leak.
It was just a slight bit of water coming in. Ever so slight.
But I still kept on rowing. I was approaching a current, so I rowed it to land and dragged it all the way back.
It worked.
I rowed in it some more, and then I drug it up. Full videos on my YouTube at Dylan Ayres. So one day I went to the party store and got a bunch of giant balloons and a helium tank, and then went home to see what I could make fly away. I already had 2 blown up. I blew up the first red one, tied it, and then I blew up the second blue one and tied it. And now I had 4 balloons. And then I twisted and taped all the strings together and tried to lift up a weight, but it failed. So then I tried an apple. And it worked. After that, I had an idea to tie a box to the strings and send something away. I trimmed up the box and forgot the 4th balloon. So I tied it on and then went outside and taped a Tesla Hot Wheel to the box and tried to send it to space. And it went down. So I ripped off some cardboard and it still failed. I ripped off some more and it went to my roof, then fell off. I let it go a final time and it took off and left on into space. Part 3 of making a giant paper airplane. So I made this paper airplane and threw it off a bridge, but it failed. So I put it in the dumpster and made a new and improved version. And then took it to a new spot to test if it was better than the other one. And yeah, it was. And it even did a backflip. Swoosh. But the wings still didn't have enough support, so I added some cardboard and went to try again. I threw it off the hill and had my best flight yet. My brother also threw it, and then I flew it a few more times as well. And something about the plane just made it kept doing flips and stuff. I don't know why. I left, and then the next day it was less windy, so I came back with my old plane as well to test them both out. And they both did pretty bad, but then I threw it again, and they did alright. And my brother had some pretty good throws. Phew. And then I left. Go watch the full video on my YouTube, Dylan Ayres. Part 7 of making a rubber band ball. So I've been making this ball, and it's pretty giant now and weighs 10 pounds. But I wanted it bigger, so I went to Walmart, got a bunch of colored rubber bands, then went home, dumped them out, put my gloves on, and first finished off the pile of normal rubber bands that was already on the table. And once I was done with that, I dumped out all the bags of colored rubber bands and began placing them. I did this for quite a while, and the ball was finished, and it was huge. And it now weighs 11.9 pounds and is almost the size of a basketball. And it also bounces pretty high. And I also shot it in the hoop. And now I'm officially finished with it. It looks pretty cool. So one day I decided to take my 12.9 pound rubber band ball and see how high it would bounce off a building. But first in the street and then in the hoop. And then I got a ladder and climbed up to the roof of my house with the ball to throw it off. I threw it off and it bounced pretty high and went into the yard. And then I tried to go up even higher to throw it off and just dropped the ball and almost took out my brother. And then I went down so I didn't fall off. I put the ball in my car and took it to a parking garage to throw it off that. I walked up there and tossed the ball off. Yeah, it bounced pretty high. And then I went back up all cinematic with the ball, ran around, and then I fell. But I got back up, took my ball to the edge and bounced it off. And then celebrated. Full vid will be on my YouTube. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball and it now weighs 11.9 pounds and is the size of a basketball. And I was going to stop, but everyone wanted me to keep going, so I went to Walmart, got some more bands, then went home, dumped them out, put some gloves on, and got back at it. I started by placing the pile of colored rubber bands because it's easier to place. And once I was done with that, I weighed it and it was 12.9 pounds and still bounced pretty high and made a good basketball. Then I went to Walmart to get more colored rubber bands, but they were out, so I just got the normal ones and went home, dumped that out, and placed that entire pile. I finished it off, and it was now 13.4 pounds, and still the size of a basketball, and still bounced pretty high. Like if you want me to keep going and just see how big I can make it. Part 3 of filling a hamster ball up with ball pit balls. So it's pretty cool now, but everyone wanted more, so I went back to Walmart. And it looked like they were out, but I found 5 in the back and bought them all. Then I put them in my car, went home, and put cardboard over my broken ramp. Then set the hamster ball down and filled it up with the ball pit balls. Then got in and let it air up. Pshh. And it was done. I went off into the yard, and then I slid in it. Then I went onto the street and hit the ramp, and disappeared. Then reappeared and went back onto the road, rolled around for a bit, and after that, I hit the ramp again and lost my water bottle, so I dove down and found it. Then I got out and jumped on it, like if you want to see me put it in the creek. Part 2 of floating down the creek in a hamster ball. So the current continued to take me away, and I eventually tried to stand up, but I just fell. And I just laid there, and the big current started to approach, and I fell again. I eventually tried to stand up again and also fell another time and just let the rapids take me away. And it was pretty fun, but eventually my brother pulled me in and I got out. I relaxed for a second and then began towing the hamster ball back upstream with my brother. And the cows were in the way, but eventually they moved and we carried it to shore and on up into the truck. Rubber band ball part 9. So a lot of people don't know that it started when this watermelon exploded and left me with this wad of rubber bands. And ever since then I've just been adding on to it, and this is the entire compilation up until now. And I needed more colored rubber bands, so I went to Walmart, but they were out. So I got gas and went to a different Walmart. But they were out too, so I went to another one and they finally had some. Then I went home, dumped out a bag, and then got busy placing the entire pile of rubber bands until I was done. And then I left and came back later. I dumped out the colored rubber bands and placed that entire pile. Then I found some more rubber bands in the floor, placed those, and then placed a bag of thicker rubber bands that I also found in the floor. And I was done. It now weighs 14.7 pounds, is the size of my head, and bounces pretty high. And it's also bigger than a basketball, like if you want me to keep going. So one day I ordered an inflatable couch to float down the creek in. I unwrapped it and then let it air up and got on it. And then folded it into a couch and my dog got on it. Then we took it outside, put it in my brother's truck, and went to the creek. I sat by the highway and then carried it all the way down over the rocks and out to the water and out to the launching point where I pushed off. And it worked really well and was amazing. I continued on and then decided to lay down and just enjoy the ride. And then I almost ran into a tree. And I kept going out even further and waved goodbye to my brother. And before you know it, I was just gone, out of sight of anything but the GoPro. But eventually I came back and dragged it all the way back to shore, up the rocks, and into the truck, and all the way home. So one day I went to Walmart and got an inflatable rubber duck to float down the creek on. I blew it up and headed down to the creek and out onto the water.
Under the bridge.
I got on it, pushed off, and let the current take me away until I got stuck. I made it out, gained some distance, and kept on going down the creek. And when I got far enough, I waved goodbye to my brother and kept on going. The current slowed down a little and I had to paddle, but I made it out, and before long, I was almost out of sight. But eventually I came back and drug it all the way to land and on up into the truck. So I've been making this giant rubber band ball, and it's pretty big now, but everyone wanted it bigger, so I went to Walmart to get more bands, but they were out, so I went to a different Walmart and got some. Then went home, set down a pile of bands, and got busy placing the entire thing until it was done. And then I dumped out a few more bags and first placed the bag of smaller rubber bands and then the bags of thicker rubber bands until I was done with that. And it now weighs nearly 16 pounds and still bounces pretty high, but it's hard to catch now. And it makes a decent basketball. Like if you want me to keep going. So one day it was my brother and I's birthday and he got me a rubber chicken. And then I drove to the dollar store to get him something. I went to the toy aisle, browsed around, and got a silly hand, a kazoo, a slinky, and to be funny, a get well soon balloon. Then some silly string from my own idea. And some lifesavers to, treat myself. I then went home and gave him the balloon. Then the kazoo. And the silly hand that he hit the camera with. And the slinky, then this. Happy birthday, get well soon. So one day I went to Walmart to get a Power Wheels, but they were too expensive, so I left and got this used Viper that needed a battery instead. I went to the battery store and got what I needed, then went home, screwed off the seat, then put the new battery in, and screwed the seat back on, and got on it, and took off. And drove down the driveway and into the road where it wouldn't move. So I gave it a little push, and then I headed for the ramp where I made a massive jump. Then I drove pretty fast down a hill, but the problem was getting back up the hill. And we ended up having to carry it, and then I put it in my car and took it out to the country to really open it up. I drove out to the road and floored it. Gone I went, and then I ended up crashing. And I got up and ran into the field, leaving behind my awesome Viper.